Hi, my name's Catherine Berlinger, and I'd like to talk about criteria for student practice. I've had some faculty member asking me questions about how they know whether or not the practice in their classroom is productive or useful for students, and so I promised I would come up with some criteria, and these are some that I brainstormed, so I hope they're useful. So when I'm talking about in-class practice, I'm also referring to practice that could be done online. If you're teaching an online course, I'm also teaching one of my postgraduate courses online as well as in the classroom in the college. So when I'm thinking about the practice the students are having, I realize that every outcome requires some kind of practice. And so every lesson that I've designed needs to include opportunities for that practice. So I'm asking you to think about the last few practice activities you've had students do in your class. If you want to pause and write them down, what have you had them doing? And think about, do they meet the following criteria? Now this is just criteria that I've come up with, so it's just something with which to examine your practices. And then ask yourself, are there other criteria that you use to judge your practice sessions that I've left out? And I'd love to hear from you if there are. And how would your students defend the practice you provide? What would they say about it? So one of the ways that I came up with the categories I'm going to look at here on this wheel is I looked at what I've heard students complain about in terms of practice in the past. So by looking at what they complained about and what seems to have worked, I came up with these items. So the first off at the top there, I'm going to go clockwise, is targeted. Was the practice targeted? Was it clear that it was directed towards something? Was it deliberate? Was it both structured and improvised, which is a hard dance to do? Was it active, guided, repeated with variations so students could see what the main principles are, mindful and self-monitored, and finally, was it successful so that the student felt good at the end? And I'm going to go through each of these now in turn. I'm thinking about all of these from the learner's viewpoint. So from the learner's viewpoint, was the practice that you provided targeted? Could the student say, in this practice session, I'm trying to accomplish X. The goal stretches me beyond what I can do, and I can't be complacent. I've got to be really interested in what I'm doing here and working away at it. And would the student also say it was deliberate, that they had some kind of a hypothesis going into it, that if they tried this, doing it this way, it should work? Were they in a kind of practice zone and not distracted by too much going on? Would a student be able to say that it was both structured and improvised? Could I say I'm working on part or all of a process under very clear conditions, that patterns and organization exist, that this is part of a larger system? At the same time, could the student say, or could I say, I need to be free to improvise. In this moment, something new might be created, an unknown part of the system, that even though I might be a novice, within confines of safety and respect, I own my own practice, and do I have some fun with it and some experimentation? And is it active? Are my attention and energy required for the practice session? Is it structured so that I can't be passive and still do the practice tasks? Yet are the requirements not so strenuous that I can maintain my concentration to the end of the practice session? So is it active but not overwhelming? It's really important to look at how much guidance you give students. So students say to themselves, obviously if something's not working, I need to do something different, but do I have a guide or is there a built-in self-test to help me? I always remember that practice can make perfect, but it can also make permanent, and so somebody needs to correct the student or myself if something's, or me if I'm the learner, if something's going wrong. I need to know if I'm on the right track and what to reconsider. And at the same time, it's really important that the expert doesn't take over and do the work, because the entire idea of the practice is for the learner to have the practice and get feedback. Another thing to look at is whether or not the practice is repeated with some variations. Am I practicing enough to know what's going right and why, and if I can do that consistently, or what went wrong and why, and how can I avoid or correct the error? What happens under different conditions? What's the underlying principle? Because obviously it's not going to be enough if a student can do something only under a very, very simple condition. When they get out onto their practicum placement or out in the workforce, things will not be as easy as that. And the final two criteria that I've thought of for this particular presentation are mindful and self-monitored and successful. So students need to have an opportunity within the way the practice is set up to reflect on ways that they can improve their performance. They need to know what variables need to change for better results, and they need to know what they were doing with that variable before. An opportunity to share or record impressions is incredibly helpful in taking ownership of a practice session, and the students need to be able to perform on demand in the upcoming test setting. Sorry for the spelling there. And so they need to be able to have found out if they're doing okay and look for additional help if needed. And finally, they need to be successful. Constant failure makes students so defensive and also can cause them to withdraw. So even understanding why the goal was not accomplished so that they can try again is a success. But it's really important that before we send them out to be evaluated formally, that they've had some success in the practice session. So I hope this has been helpful in thinking about your practice sessions.